Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today is a day when we're supposed to be talking about marine cloud brightening, and I expect we'll get around to that. But I have three guests with me who have different orientations. They're not all from the same kind of activities. I think I want to mention Aria McKenna first, because Aria is a co-founder of something called the Happy Planet Action Coalition, or Healthy
Healthy.
Planet Action Coalition. Is that it?
Yes.
HPAC. Well, there are a whole bunch of webinar groups nowadays that are interested in global warming, and especially, I think, interested in the various technological proposals that have been made to help reverse the trend toward global warming, repairing the climate, or restoring the climate to pre-industrial levels. And so there are many, many discussions going on, and there are even places that you can watch people give talks and that sort of thing. It's quite an overwhelming kind of experience to get in on their network, because you get emails every day from people who want to talk about very specific scientific questions. And so I want to say hello, Aria. Thank you very much for creating that wonderful organization, the Healthy Planet Action Coalition. Okay.
Thank you, Meta. And yeah, I feel like I can take very little credit for it. It really was a lot of people just surfacing and feeling like there was a need, that there was a gap in a particular area, and that we had to strategize to figure out how to fill that gap. So started with a conversation between Suzanne Reed and I, really recognizing that there was a need to discuss a three-pronged strategy for restoring a safe climate. I like to think of this as a holistic strategy for restoring a safe climate. And so obviously we need to reduce emissions. We also need to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, and also recognizing that because of the existing warming, we've already unleashed feedback loops that are taking things too far. We have to do something to reduce temperatures so that we're not continuing to release more and more feedback loops that are going to make it difficult to get a hold of the situations.
I think that I want you to have a conversation with Robin and Adele, because
Right.
let me introduce you now. They need to know you and your network, your Healthy Planet Action Coalition, and we'll have a conversation about what each of us are trying to do with our own little uh, our own little activities. So, Robin Collins is a member of the Canadian Pugwash Organization group, and I've known him a very long time. He lives in Ottawa, and he has just become engaged with several of these networks, one of which is this Healthy Planet Action Coalition. So, Robin, say hello to Aria, and then I'll come back to you in a minute.
Hello.
Hi. Nice to meet you officially.
It's good to meet, both of you need to know each other, and I'm sure you're going to see more of each other. And Adele Buckley is a physicist and an engineer, and also very involved with the Canadian Pugwash Group, as well as the International Pugwash Organization. She's been on the, I don't know what that committee is, the board or the council or something for that runs the International Pugwash Group. Adele, say a bit about your own orientation, what you are interested in doing. I think mostly in the Arctic, aren't you?
I have had a huge variety of experience in science-related things, and my most recent, I don't know, 12 or so years as a career were spent in the Ontario Centre for Environmental Technology Advancement, where there was where amongst other things, I spent a lot of time on uh, new technologies, and I also just want my general science background to be a contributor to um, what's being discussed about marine cloud brightening and other so geoengineering. I do think that now, and I have changed my mind. I really thought geoengineering was a bad idea, and I still do in most cases because we are so uncertain of the repercussions of doing it. Nevertheless, things are getting pretty desperate, as I'm sure that Aria understands and Robin does, that I think geoengineering is called for and we need to speed up. Now, I just watched almost all of Gwynne Dyer's interview with Meta yesterday,
Did you?
and he has changed into being a supporter of geoengineering. And I think it's important to recognize his point of view that once you have something you are going to do, it takes close to 20 years before you actually do it, as the human population. So if we have geoengineering today, that we this little group or others like us think is useful, it probably won't get into full-scale implementation for quite a long time, unless there's some way of speeding it up.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, there's just a lot of overexuberance, and that's what worries me. Is like, oh, let's do this, let's do that, without sort of trying to examine as best we can the implications, um, and the side effects and all of those things, or even the practicality. I mean,
Mm.
there's some pretty wild-eyed things I've heard on some of Meta's interviews, and some sensible things.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. By the way, you say he's changed. Well, I don't think so. I think he's been a geoengineering advocate from the get-go because he wrote a book about 15 years ago on the same subject, way before anybody else was ready to talk about it. And this book is not particularly thorough in analyzing the technologies. It doesn't, it gives you a little bit of a glimpse of the kinds of issues that have to be explored and the data and the kinds of numbers that they try to crunch. But it doesn't go, that's not the main focus. The book is particularly good because it starts where people are. It starts with the questions that people have as to whether or not almost they treat, of course, geoengineering as if it's one thing, but of course, it's many different possible technologies. But people treat it as the whole idea of doing anything to intervene in nature is bad idea and dangerous. So he goes through looking at the realities of how serious our present uh, prospects are. That we're really going to be in absolutely catastrophic condition quite soon. And he spends at least half of the book, the first half, showing what is trying to prove to people that we really have to do something, that we have no choice. Either you go under or you start right away doing what you can to figure out what needs to be done. He is not even right now saying go ahead and implement or deploy these things. He doesn't think any of them are ready. I think some of them could be are ready within a year or so. I think iron salt aerosol could be done pretty soon. And there are various other things.
I
Maybe
think
even, yeah.
I
So
think I think he has the right approach.
mhm,
I'd be interested to hear what Arias has to say about
mhm,
the public perception. I don't even know if it's public perception. There's environmentalist or an activist perception about climate restoration or geoengineering. I'm going to use the G word,
Mhm.
geoengineering. There's a public and well, it's an expert opinion in a certain sector, but it's very much um, focused against the idea of human engineering, and it's almost ideological. I don't know if I want to use that word, but there's a resistance to even considering experimentation, and that really worries me. And what I like about Gwyn's book, and he had a short piece in the Globe and Mail excerpted from it, is he's starting with, how bad is it? It's to the to, how bad is it such that we would need to employ or deploy geoengineering? I think that's the right approach. The thing is, we are really behind behind on this. Like the decisions have to be made imminently, very quickly, because we've waited so late to do the, carbon capture or carbon reduction and transition of energy and industry and so on. Um, you know, I will say it right out that it is impossible to transition the globe to at this rate needed in terms of carbon elimination in our processes to do it in time, because even if you look at CO2 levels now, they've actually risen from previously. They're at the highest ever. We haven't even started the reduction, let alone the elimination. Or we have reduced, but the increases have increased faster than the reductions, I guess is the way to put it. But Aria, what's your take on this? I mean, aside from being behind on public perception and the role that environmentalists are playing right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a huge issue, the fact that I think it's vastly misunderstood. But I just want to speak to what you're saying, is that the bottom line is that we have to be able to analyze, we have to look at it from a risk perspective. What are the risks of doing nothing? We know that if we don't implement some kind of direct climate cooling at this point in time, that greenhouse gases are going to continue to go up and up and up. And I've been a huge supporter for some time of the energy transition that we need to make. And it should never be an excuse to not make that energy transition. And I understand that people are very concerned about this being used as an excuse for the fossil fuel industrial complex, pardon what I call them, to continue with business as usual, and for corporations not to be held accountable for their own actions. And so I think it's really important that any kind of action that we do take, and that can be construed as geoengineering, be done with that recognition that it is not a substitute for the other types of systemic changes that absolutely need to be done to fix the underlying situation that got us in this position to begin with. And so I really understand the concerns, but I am more concerned about doing nothing at this point in time in terms of responding to the thermal dynamics of the situation. Because, the bottom line is that we have to do something about warming to repair the underlying weather systems that, the currents of the ocean, the currents of the air that are causing, insane weather events. We've got Category 6 hurricanes right now. We're seeing, just increased frequency, increased severity. We're seeing droughts. We're seeing, massive disruption to animal populations and fish die-offs in the oceans. And, I think we are really at the tipping point right now, and that's not generally understood by the general public because we're not talking about it enough in the media.
Well, that's, I think, what we need to talk about together. because I believe all of us would agree that even if you have agreement about, even if we knew a lot more than we do scientifically about what the risks are, it would be very hard to get agreement among the states and the countries internationally to get permission to do real interventions at scale. Anyway, even getting experimentation approved is difficult. People are having their experiments canceled because people are scared of the possible effects. But one of the things that Gwen and I agreed is that the thing that really is the biggest obstacle is public opinion. We don't now have enough interest or awareness of, or certainly enthusiasm for supporting experimentation and research, and much less deployment of these technologies. So we need to work on getting public awareness involved. And I think that's what we all have in common. I've been working on public awareness about global warming over a long time, but now for the last year or two, especially on climate repair. And of course, Aria has already introduced us to the organization that you have been engaged with creating. And both Robin and Adele, and I too, but Robin and Adele more, are very engaged with the international pugwash movement, and particularly, of course, the Canadian group. And I'd like to consider whether or not pugwash, let's talk about what we are each doing as activists to change public opinion or to influence awareness of the threats that global warming produces now, and the opportunities that we have to intervene and turn things around. And I think, Robin, you have been running some sort of campaign, which I would like to know more about, obviously, in the Canadian Pugwash group. And Adele, you are more familiar than any of us with the international pugwash movement. And my impression is that so far, pugwash has not become a big advocate, whatever, for intervention in climate. I'd like to know what both the Canadian Pugwash Group and the international movement, what the status of public opinion is within those groups, and what the organizations are trying to do, if anything, that bears on stimulating engagement by the public in knowing more and promoting this kind of work. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm doing now with a course that I've just created. Would you, let's start with the Canadian movement. Robin, tell me what has been going on among Canadian Pugwash members.
So I think Adele can comment after this in more detail about what the opportunities are within the international, which to a certain extent reflects the national groups. But I don't know the status of climate within the international as compared to nuclear weapons abolition and conflict resolution, which are, the foci that have been prominent in the international, so also in the Canadian for that matter. But more recently, we've been working with Meta in part with her many podcasts on climate over the last couple of years, and as a result, there were 4 projects that were offered as let's say primary ones that Canadian Pugwash could establish reports on that could go forward to the government. And they were on Arctic cooling, which is relevant to our discussion, urban trees, soil amendments, and concrete that was low carbon concrete. So the 4 reports I would say 3 of them are imminent. One has been delayed unavoidably, but we will at least get the 3 out quickly, and the 4th should follow. But what I observe is that of the 4, the Arctic cooling is by far the most important now. And it's in the context of our conversation that we've just had, which is there's lots of things we can do, but the urgency is requiring focus. And I think that's why we're seeing, Gwyn's book come out, and Globe Mail even bothering to have a full page on the subject of geoengineering. And the New York Times had one just a couple of weeks ago that was, really quite pushy, if you want to be, do you want to put it in those terms? So I think from Canadian Pugwash, and I don't speak, I'm secretary and on the board, as is Adele of Canadian Pugwash, and I don't speak for the organization itself. But I think we may find that, these reports go to the government, and then we will have to assess as to how much time those of us involved in this will be putting in through Pugwash. I think it's one of those existential threats that has now risen to the top. There are a few, but this is now one of them for sure. So,
Well, but Robin, how many other members of Pugwash would take that seriously? And I appreciate the fact that you are really quite engaged with the issue now, but I'm not sure that
it's hard to,
other
Well,
people.
yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, Adele, you could comment similarly on this. My feeling is, yeah, there weren't many within Pugwash who I think saw climate as a priority of the organization per se. Some certainly, but I think things have changed. I mean, in even since we started this project, I think the forest fires across Canada, for example, have really opened people's eyes as to what degree El Nino has had an impact on the warming that played a part in the burning last year. And it may be still here this year, because we're expecting, and we're going to predict a major forest catastrophe in Canada this year, probably worse than last year. I mean, you heard it here first. Now, to the degree that it's entirely, global warming, it's a cyclical weather pattern, or El Nino, it has to be assessed. But all of the indicators are that the temperature globally, not just North American, has gone up far faster than expected in the last year or two. And all of this,
It's worse than that. It's not just expected, but they have these models that can predict, how much to expect from this and that. And they take account of the El Nino, which certainly exacerbates the problem. But even if they take all of these things into account, the models that they would predict are pretty bad. But what reality has happened is it's a whole notch above the worst prediction that all of the models could have come up with.
I think though, in terms of public opinion, models don't do it. What does it is burning fires and smoke in your city. That's when people go, oh, it really is happening.
And first of all, it's unfortunate that it has to be in someone's city before they recognize that it's actually happening, because it's happening all over the world, but we're not paying enough attention to it because, I mean, it's self-preservation. People have so much to take care of in their lives that to, really do the deep thinking about climate and to really understand it takes a certain amount of dedication. If you've got a lot of other things going on, it's extremely difficult. But I just want to mention the irony is that we are geoengineering right now. And, every single time we drive our cars and we turn on the lights in our houses and everything, this is all affecting the atmosphere. We know it's affecting the atmosphere in a detrimental way. And yet, when it comes to scientists trying to figure out how to fix the situation, there's this moratorium on, you're not allowed to do that. And this is, we don't have public opinion behind it. And even though I understand those concerns, we have to recognize that we are doing that right now. We just know that we're doing it in the wrong direction right now. And that has government support. We're subsidizing this climate catastrophe that we are heading toward. Governments are giving trillions of dollars towards this, and it's affecting human beings around the planet who are having to shell out for our addiction. And then when it comes to national security, I mean, the Pentagon called climate change the greatest threat to national security. It's one of the greatest threats to national security, and yet we're not giving money to it. We're spending all this money on war as opposed to spending money on fixing the crises that are contributing to global unrest, climate refugees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if we had more conversations about how climate is amplifying all of these other issues, and that if we really get to the heart of fixing the reasons behind the climate crisis to begin with, we're going to see a lot of other situations start to ameliorate: poverty, et cetera, around the world, health issues. 9 million people died because of fossil fuels. I mean, you could just keep going and going and going.
Right, thank you. And I think Adele, you could tell us about the international movement, because
well, I'd just like to respond a bit to Aria. In continuation, yes, the government of Canada is not doing enough. They talk and they don't do it. I don't think that the world in general has accepted that, in fact, we cannot maintain our current way of doing things. They somehow want to just make a little tiny change, and that's okay. And it's not okay. We are about to have a lower standard of living, and we better, pull ourselves together and accept it. Now, going back to international pugwash, they are in a state of leadership flux, and various other things that are. The Pugwash Council is the name of it. Well, it's sort of an advisory body, very much not really like a board of directors. There's an executive committee that is a little bit like a board of directors. Anyway, they are not, they have, at a recent executive meeting, been very concerned about their inability to address current world stresses, but that's particularly the issues of war and nuclear weapons and climate change. Has a little bit of interest from the European pugwash areas, and not a lot from Canadian pugwash either. So, and just to mention the solar geoengineering, which we had some idea of talking about, it just doesn't seem that there's anybody in Canada that I know of that is in that research area. Now, somehow or other in the last day or two, or whatever, maybe from Gwynne Dyer, I don't know, that it's only maybe 100 people worldwide, academically speaking, who are engaged in solar geoengineering work. It should be a lot more. So, but however, I need also to respond to the idea that we need to do Arctic cooling. As far as I know, and the last thing I know is atmospheric physics. In fact, I know a little, but it's nothing like enough. It's not the global circulation takes account of the entire globe, and whatever happens in one place eventually affects the other place. I think it is a bad planning and a waste of resources, and not a good thing to do Arctic cooling, because it is such a difficult thing to do. There's no reason to not do cooling in places where it's easier. because if you cool in one place, it affects the entire globe. So why would we go to the very, very difficult Arctic environment? And I say this from a sort of large number of years spent following Arctic issues and happening to run a discussion website, a discussion list on that topic. It's a very hard thing to do, and it's not necessary to cool the Arctic. I mean, once if you had a small amount of Arctic cooling and the rest of the globe is still warm, it would just melt again. I mean, and all the excess um, effort and expenses and greenhouse gases spent to cool the Arctic would simply go away again. You have to cool everything, and there's no reason to cool the Arctic as opposed to the rest of the world. So, by the way, I don't know if you probably know about this, but anyway, I discovered something called Solar Geoengineering Updates newsletter, like this, and maybe you know this organization. It's very extensive, apparently, and there's a much going on there, and worth a look if you're really serious on solar geoengineering. I'd like to share one other thought because maybe I won't have a chance otherwise to share it, but there's I wish there were more people in Canada interested in this, but there is the Bedford, I think it's called the Bedford Oceanographic Institute, which is just, if you like, at Halifax, essentially. It's there's the Halifax major harbor area, and then there's the Bedford Basin. And the Bedford Basin, due to the fact that the Oceanographic Institute is there, is probably extremely well characterized as to temperature and everything else about it. And it is a body of water which is probably sufficiently large to use as a place to do some kind of cooling experiment where it could actually be measured, because somehow you've got to be able to make a convincing argument that this works. And this to me looks like a place where it should be at least explored. But it's very hard to deal with this when there seem to be no Canadian scientific bodies working on it that I know of. Maybe you do.
Mm-hmm. If you don't mind, I want to respond to Adele, because I think Adele and I really do have a disagreement here. I think, Adele, you think that you have to cool the whole planet equally in order to have an influence in any one locality. That is, I think you would agree with me that the most urgent need is to keep the Arctic frozen, because the ice reflects, the ice and snow reflect light into outer space and keep us from reaching a tipping point where things become irreversibly warm. Once you get the ice melted from the Arctic Ocean, it becomes black and it absorbs even more heat, and therefore it's a self-functioning cycle. It's harder to reverse it. So it's very, very crucial to keep the poles cold and especially white. It's important, for example, to stop having soot fall on the snow, because that darkens it and absorbs the heat. Now, your argument is that you have to. It doesn't matter where you remove CO2 or any other greenhouse gas from the atmosphere, because the CO2 is all over the world in the atmosphere. That's true, but that is not to say that you can't cool any one locality in specific. For example, there's definitely a plan, and it's underway, to keep the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia from being destroyed by the heat by keeping clouds over it. So if you can whiten the clouds over the Great Barrier Reef, then you can keep that particular location cooler than it would be otherwise. And you can do the same thing in the Arctic. You can keep the ice from melting if you can keep reflect the sun away so that it doesn't land, as much of it doesn't land on the snow. We need to do the Arctic. We certainly need to remove CO2. That's the name of the game eventually. But in the short term, to give ourselves time, because these underwater reserves of methane could explode and then create a vast an extinction phenomenon, maybe. So, I don't play down the idea that marine cloud brightening or even some of the other technologies can reduce the global warming in a particular locality, especially the poles.
But I really would like to see a comparison of marine cloud brightening. What you want is something that will get the sun to reflect away from the earth. And you're saying the ice will do that. Well, the ice indeed will do that. But there's another argument that I've never heard you discuss at all on the Arctic, and that is that many economies in the world, and particularly Russia and China and India, you name it, South Korea, everybody that does shipping, are busily looking forward to shipping across the Arctic. And if you believe that they would agree to a significant amount of Arctic re-icing, I think you're dreaming. They would not. And so there would be a huge opposition to even attempting that. Whereas I think you could probably gain some support for the marine cloud brightening.
There are ways of having a channel through the ice. I've definitely seen plans for trying to refreeze the Arctic. And it's not that these are an either or thing. The way you would refreeze the Arctic is by albedo, protecting the albedo, protecting the reflectivity of light away from the Arctic or the Antarctic, so as to keep the poles cold. And that's the only way in the short term you can do it. There's a very quick kind of reaction. You can while the cloud is over the water, if you whiten the cloud, the amount of the temperature underneath can be cooled right then and there instantly. So that's how you would cool if you really wanted to go all out for refreezing the Arctic. The marine cloud brightening would be a very a significant way. You can't probably do it with reducing CO2 from the entire globe. That's going to take a long time. That's going to take a lot longer. But in shorter term, you can do albedo enhancement by marine cloud brightening, or they do other things like trying to prevent soot from falling on the ice, or even there's an effort in Cambridge Bay now to thicken the ice during the winter so that it would not melt as much in the summer. So there are a number of ways in which you might be able to protect locally and give us enough time so that we can use the longer term strategy of reducing the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and ironically, my understanding of sea ice thickening, and I assume there might be other, various ways to do this, but I mean, ExxonMobil was taking water from the oceans, putting it on top of sea ice, and during cold months, when it was for their purposes, they were doing this. And I can't remember why they would want to do this, but this was something that has been done in the past. And we're not doing that when it comes to trying to preserve our biospheric ecosystem.
I can say something about that. That is exactly how they freeze skating rinks. They come along and they spray the top of the ice and thicken the ice by having the ice frees the next layer of water that falls on it, and they thicken the ice. So the thicker the ice is, the more likely it is to survive the next melting season, and that works. However, there are questions about whether that's going to be successful or not. I did an interview with Sean Fitzgerald, the head of the Cambridge, what's it called, the Center for Climate Repair. And he was telling us about something that's being done in Canada now under the auspices of the Cambridge organization. It's at Cambridge Bay in Canada. And what they're doing is exactly taking water from underneath and putting it up on top of the ice to thicken it in the winter. But the problem is the water is salt water, and they are not sure whether the salt water works the same way that regular fresh water would work when sprayed on top of the water on the
No,
ice. So
but
this is an experiment, but they're not sure whether it's going to work or not. If
no,
they succeed, then they'll have pumps. The idea of having thousands or maybe millions of these pumps all over the Arctic, taking water from underneath and spraying it on top of the ice, that would be lovely. You can thicken it that way. Of course, it would cost you zillions of dollars, but that is the technology exists already. That's how they make ice rinks.
so you can correct me if I'm wrong, Meta. I thought that ExxonMobil had already been doing that exact same thing using salt water and that it was successful in the past.
I don't know. You know me, I don't know.
That's
But
yeah,
it's
yeah. I
just
mean, I
a
remember
small
reading
area.
about
It's not the whole ocean. It's not enough of an ice change to change the albedo to all of a sudden reflect enough light to make the Arctic cold enough to form ice on its own. It just it's there have to be better ways than refreezing the Arctic. That is, the Arctic, if the globe was cool enough, would refreeze on its own.
So there's a couple of things that you're talking about that should not be conflated. One is the most urgent thing that needs to be done is to cool the Earth, and in particular, the Arctic. That does not mean that the best ways of achieving the cooling of the Arctic actually take place in the Arctic, right? That marine cloud brightening
Yes,
would
yes.
not necessarily take place in the Arctic, but would cool by reflecting or deflecting the sunlight. That would cool the Earth, which would allow, to some extent, the Arctic to recover to some extent. What I'm making is, whichever project works best for the Arctic cooling is the right project, whether or not that takes place in the Arctic. If
Agreed.
and I agree with you, Meta, that it could be possibly in the Arctic, that marine cloud brightening could be in the Arctic, but it doesn't have to be if the effect brings down the temperature globally, and therefore the Arctic in particular, even if that project takes place not in the Arctic. So those are all different things. I do not know which of the projects will be the most effective. It could be, spraying water on the ice. It could be marine cloud brightening. It could be whatever. So there's all of that. Then there's the other question, which is the political question that Aria mentioned. It's totally different. It's a totally different question. Not that they're not connected, but it's totally different in the sense that getting the political will to move on climate cooling is different from whether it needs to be done or not. And how the political will is captured is a huge question. And there will be resistance from certain states who see, the Northwest Passage as being benign. But that's like saying, if we kill all the fish, we'll feed people, for a couple of weeks really well. But then, of course, there's this other problem that there's no more fish. So if the Northwest Passage opens up for, Russia or China or whomever, good for them. But it won't last long if the world's economy and ecology collapses as a result of that passage, which happened because of global warming. right? So they have to, that's a political,
Yeah, but they
will
just seem to
question.
be blindfolded. They could care less. They're
Right. So we
going
have to
right ahead.
solve that problem is the point I'm making.
The political strategy and how to change their minds to fit with how we preserve our ecosystems. That's the number
Absolutely.
one.
Absolutely. First of all, we need the data, we have it, that shows the world is warming and it's crisis level. Not everybody knows that it's crisis level
Right.
to the extent that it is. And then there are potential solutions, which is what we're talking about here.
And we need the data
Bringing those
to show
together,
that they
and
might work.
that will create the political will. Bringing those two things together, well, I mean, maybe it won't, but that's what we have to do. We have to try to bring the data and the solutions together to create the political will. And I
now,
think starting.
there's some things we do know. One important thing is that there are two basically different ways of solving global warming. Number one is reduce the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. That is a very long-term solution. It is not something we can do probably in our lifetime. I mean, my lifetime for sure, but even your lifetime, because we've got to not only stop emitting, but we've got to take greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere and put it away. That is a very big, huge challenge. It's the only way we're going to do it, because the problem exists not just only in the atmosphere, but also in the land and especially in the ocean. The ocean is acidifying. The only way to get the acidification reversed is to take carbon out of the atmosphere, out of this ocean and out of the atmosphere, and sequester it. So that problem is going to be with us for 100 years at least, probably a lot longer than that. The alternative means in the short term of cooling the planet is albedo. That's simple. It can be ice reflecting, it can be clouds reflecting, it could be sulfur that you spray into the stratosphere reflecting. Well, it consists entirely of an immediate effect of immediately cooling the planet, that's the part of the planet that's under the reflectivity. You can immediately cool that, but it's not a long-term solution. You'd have to keep doing it forever if you wanted to cool the planet, and you would not be able to save your oceans that way. So you have to do both. The long-term solution has to be greenhouse gas emissions. The short-term solution can be local actions to protect a particular area that's likely to explode unless you do something like that. And I think that the Arctic shows that there are places where there are already explosions. There are 20 some odd big craters that they found in Siberia, where underground massive amounts of methane are exploding. And they're doing it under the oceans too, especially the Arctic Ocean. If it happens in the Laptev Sea, we could be goners. It's that simple.
And I think that's the bottom line, is that we are warming faster than what has been predicted because of events like that. And, because of other things that don't get reported when it comes to, we said that we were going to make a transition to natural gas and that was somehow going to solve our problems. We've got methane leaking in pipelines in massive amounts that was never actually factored into the system. So, we know that it takes a long time to analyze all the information. And if we wait until we've done all the analysis, we could be goners by then. And that's reality. That's not overly stating the situation, unfortunately. Plus, we're dealing with the health of the oceans. I mean, life started in the oceans. We've got to do what we can to preserve life in the oceans if we want to expect that we're going to be able to survive. And so when we're got melting in the poles, that's affecting the AMOC, which is making, a lot of fish not be able to find food, and they're dying off. And so we've got to, and not to mention coral reefs, which are a great love of mine. So the bottom line is protecting our ecosystems and recognizing that it's warming 4 times faster was the last time I checked, but it might even be further than that. 4 times faster in the Arctic, because anyone can correct me.
I've
As
heard
far
7.
as what's that?
Say 7.
I think
I'm sorry, say that again?
there's a point here that, well, we agree on all these disastrous situations, but we should be pushing for how can we uh, slice off a little bundle of something that we can actually make happen in maybe solar radiation management. How can we get a major experimentation going that would get some data that would roll up to convince international bodies to carry on? This is important. You can't just keep on saying all these bad situations are there and we have to do so and so. We have to have some data and we have to have some smaller experiments. And I think focusing on how to get them to happen would be more productive than other discussions about what's good or bad.
Well, I think that's where marine cloud brightening comes in as well, because I feel like that's the low hanging fruit in terms of something that we can move on right away. That's the lowest risk, and people are starting on that in terms of being able to gather the data and see how it can do things like help preserve coral reefs.
How do we make it go faster?
So that's
I don't think
the-
we can, not that
Oh.
fast, because the nozzle isn't ready. The marine cloud brightening, it's going to take another 5 years before it's really likely to be functioning. You can
Oh,
do
indeed.
aerosol quicker. You can certainly do go ahead.
Well, one thing that could be done is that governments that are have an ear open can put some money into development of the nozzle. They can get more engineers working on it and speed that up. A concern that I have is I mean it's what you were saying. Why can't we test this? Forget about at scale, but we'll need to do it at scale and a test too, not just in a lab. A concern that I have is that at the Nairobi conference of UNEA number 6, I guess it was, the resistance to setting up a group of governmental experts to bring together the data and to consider what project should be started was turned down by the governments, including island governments, which are the most vulnerable of all, probably. I know it's absolutely bizarre, but they were opposed to research. They were opposed to even looking at what is or isn't dangerous. And so when I looked at that a little bit, I haven't looked at it in detail. Some of the NGOs, I would say, these are environmental groups, in quotation marks. I mean, some of them are legitimate. I don't want to disparage all of them, but they were jubilant that the result of that conference, international conference, this is the place where global climate law is agreed by nation states. It was turned down, and the advocacy was coming from environmental groups who were opposed to even research, and they were splitting their sides in glee as a result of that conference. That is a serious problem. So this is the group. These are the groups that should be on board. These are environmentalists who should understand the level of crisis we're in, and they do not. So not only do we have to reach governments, we have to reach this group of NGOs that need to have clarified for them how bad the situation is. It's serious.
Yeah. Okay.
I think, the problem is that we've had a strategy that we've all agreed to for some time. And unfortunately, governments have not responded to that strategy. They've continued to support and enable bad actors. And so they haven't adapted to where science has taken us, unfortunately. And we have seen so many bad moves by various governments. I mean, you know, the entire transition of like, oh, natural gas is going to be some bridge fuel. I mean, to me, that was one of the most devastating things that we decided to do, and it was apparently supposed to be for our own benefit. And you know, and then we're talking about you know, cleaning up fossil fuels by having them pull down the carbon that they're emitting into the atmosphere, or just and then you see them not actually doing what they say that they're going to do, while they're not taking responsibility for the, you know, massive areas around them where you've got cancer clusters because of those fossil fuel projects, and the, you know, the pollution into our waterways. So we've just seen the governments not respond in the way that they needed to the underlying issue for so long, that it makes sense to me that it would be seen as a Band-Aid, which it is a Band-Aid. You know, if you have a disease, if you're sick, sometimes you need surgery in order to get better. And that's the point that we're at right now. You know, if you've got a fever and it's about to reach 105 or something like that, you've got to reduce that fever so that your body can recover. But you shouldn't keep doing the things that got you to that place to begin with. You know, you've got to fix the underlying issue too. So I just don't think we're having enough comprehensive conversations.
Well, the point is how to generate some action. That's, I mean, we all agree that these are all the problems, but and there's a fair bit of awareness about it, but really we need to generate some action which will move a step forward, as opposed to outlining the problems.
But I think it's important to understand what the barriers to buy-in are, so that we can address those underlying issues and recognize that we're not going to continue with the thinking that got us in this place to begin with, just because we're trying to solve the problem that we're facing right now. So it's just understanding. You know, to me, I think of it as a holistic understanding of why the ideology isn't where it needs to be right now as well, in order to address it.
I agree. I think we are in flux, though. I mean, a little bit of good news is, despite the UNEA result, was, you know, the people the governments that were pushing for, you know, exploration of options included, well, Switzerland was one of the main drivers of that particular resolution that failed, but the United States was actually in support. And I believe at the last one, the United States was against geoengineering. And Canada, I don't know what Canada's position was at this event, or whether we were there, but Canada, our current science, what's it called? The science proposal for the next five-year plan. The Canadian science position includes SRM, geoengineering, to be looked at to assess whether it is something that is viable and where the dangers and risks are. So that's good. So there is a bit of an opportunity there in Canada to push this, because it is in their science guidance report that just came out in January. So they're not completely idiotic on this front. There are some governments that are pushing for it, but, you know, obviously not sufficiently. But it's not all bad news, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But how we get an experiment done, it does require political will, because I mean, some people are talking about doing an experiment out in the woods somewhere and proving it, but you really need some global approval. You need governments involved, and so we have to push harder.
So we have to get public opinion pushing the government, and I think that is the name of the game. We are all activists. We're all involved with, at least three of us, with the Canadian Pugwash, or the International Pugwash, and Aria is involved with another organization, and probably more than that.
We could get civil society pushing the government. Mind you, that's not always successful, but it would be better than not doing.
Okay. We need a lot more, like thousands and thousands of people who would like to be influencers, would like to have an impact on public opinion, and would like to be activists, but just maybe don't quite know where to start. Well, I've just created a course. You can go to Udemy and look up a course called Become a Climate Change Influencer, and you can sign up for free, and you can take the course. It'll take you 10 to 15 hours of activism, only something like 2 hours of which, less than 2 hours of which consist of watching video clips from shows similar to the ones that we're making right now, where I've taken pieces of conversations and put them together. So we have 2 hours of that. So, but there are readings, and then there are assignments for people to do in practical terms to actually go out and do things. Well, this thing only went live on Udemy about 2 days ago, and before sometime last night, I checked to see whether I have any students, and yes, at that point I had 99 students already from other
That's
parts.
impressive.
So it's off and running. I haven't got any publicity going for it yet, but I bet you we have many hundreds of, if not thousands of people enroll in this course and learning how to be activists like the 4 of us.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So thank you, Aria, for coming and sharing about the Healthy Planet Action Coalition. And thank you, my local friends, Robin and Adele is, I guess, the closest of my local friends, and she and I tend to disagree about a lot of things, but I think it's really important to have these very serious conversations about what will work and what we can do that really makes sense. So anybody with a final thought you want to say before we shut
Well,
this
my
down?
final thought is I would really like to connect to practicality and reality. What can be done, starting now? That's any things which are longer term or which require more backup or more experimentation or whatever. What can we do now? And in a practical way that is realistic. And so that would be let's stop dreaming about various things and let's try to think of things that would lead to useful results.
I just want to add to that. Thank you, Adele. And so there are things that HPAC is working on. We've got explainer videos we're working on that should hopefully help simplify and explain where we're at and what we propose needs to be done. I also, I've been doing some thinking. I'm not going to go into detail, but about some policies, if we could get some buy-in to some policies that could help turn the needle by really, recognizing the systemic issues at the heart of the situation and then adding to that in terms of what needs to be done. And I'm also working on a TV series that's in development to raise more awareness on environmental issues called Revolution Earth. But it uses a dramatic story and a love triangle at its center to engage a wider audience and get a chance to fit in the science and where we're at along the way in a fun manner to hopefully get more.
I love that idea. That's great.
Some things I'm working on.
Okay, Robin, if you have one last thought.
Okay, just to encourage people not to give up. I mean, things move along, and sometimes things look like we're not making any progress, but things can change quickly. If you look back a year ago compared to now, there's been progress. Part of it is because of Meta's project, Save the World, and on the climate material, but things can escalate very, very quickly in a good direction when the crisis captures people's imagination, and we can do it.
Good. All right. Onward, guys. Thanks so much. See you again soon, I hope. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Project Save the World produces these forums. Watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues, and we welcome your comments too. To find a particular talk show, check the scroll list on the homepage or use the search bar. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine, which now serves as a free of charge newsletter to help mobilize knowledge about 6 global threats to humankind. We gladly email the magazine as a PDF or link to any interested organization in the world that works to prevent a global catastrophe involving war and weapons, global warming, famine, pandemics, radioactive contamination, or cyber risks. Just email us at office@peacemagazine.org and we'll add your group's email address without charge to our list. Please type "subscribe my group" as the subject of your email. For individual subscriptions at $20 Canadian per year, go to pressreader.com on your browser and search for Peace Magazine.